Constructive Voices, the podcast for the construction people, with news, views, and expert interviews.
Hello, I'm Steve Randall and welcome to Constructive Voices. This time we're talking to Stephen Lorimer. He's an expert on urban innovation, sustainability, and clean energy cities.
In the future, the cheapest times of actually heating that home might be at 1 or 2 p.m. It may not be at 5 p.m. Actually, it definitely isn't at 5 p.m. even now. How do we actually automate that process of preheating the home so you still feel comfortable at 18, 19, 20 degrees? So
we'll hear more from Stephen Lorimer shortly, and Peter Finn, Pete the Builder, joins me in just a moment.
Constructive Voices media partner in Ireland and the United Kingdom is Construction Industry News. Since 2002, Construction Industry News has been focused on the very latest projects and developments within the UK and Ireland.
So, Pete, how are you doing? How's things?
Good, Steve. Good. How are you keeping?
Yeah, very well, thanks. We're not going to dwell on it, but I hear there's been a birthday recently. I know you don't want to mention it too much, but
yeah,
putting it out there.
We'll be having some birthday cake at my house today. Yeah, it is my birthday. I'm moving on in the years, but I always like to think another year on, another year of experience, and another wealth of knowledge that I've got this year, and hopefully the same again next year.
That's what it is. It's extra experience. It's not aging. That's a good way of looking at it. We're talking about somebody today who's got a lot of experience, a fantastic guest, Stephen Lorimer, and he is an expert in urban innovation and sustainable cities, and this is really building on the conversation we've been talking about certainly this year so far. This is fascinating stuff that he's done on a global basis.
Clean energy cities is his main focus at this moment in time, but before he got to that point, he certainly was a man who committed his life in such a way that he travelled, he got educated, he worked hands-on. Very, very impressive resume of both education and on-site construction knowledge as well. His main aspect that he's doing at the moment is, as I said there, clean energy cities. It's really, really interesting topic. It gives a very good insight into how, again, decisions are made at higher levels. This is not something that is just, given a few minutes thought and quick decisions are made. So much so, it's done on a global basis. They've looked at so many cities across the world, but what they've done is they've separated out the different types of cities into a different typology, and the different types that they've come up with is connected cities, free market cities, scalable cities, distributed cities, and available cities. They can then use the typology of the city to basically come up with the best solutions when it comes to having a clean energy city or a city that is certainly going in the right direction in terms of environmentally friendly and how it uses energy and all of those positive things that we speak about so often here on Constructive Voices, So it's a super interview, and it's something that I really enjoyed myself, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it again, Steve.
Absolutely. Well, let's get straight into it. He's been speaking to Jackie de Burker, and then we'll come back and talk more, Pete.
Hi, I'm Stephen Lorimer, and I'm the lead for the Clean Energy Cities program inside Centre for Net Zero, which is an impact-driven research lab, which is owned by Octopus Energy, a energy supplier in 9 countries around the world, and also amongst other things like managing investments into renewable energy, leasing electric vehicles, and other lines of business. But yeah, at a base, a retail energy supplier.
Fantastic. Now, we did meet up with Philip Steele last year in Footprint Plus of Octopus Energy, and had a really interesting 6 to 7 minute chat with him.
He's an amazing title, by the way. His title within the company is called Technology Evangelist.
I remember this.
It's amazing.
I do.
Amazing.
It is. If you were to give me a quick elevator pitch about the work you're currently doing with the Centre for Net Zero, how would that be?
Centre for Net Zero is promoting research that really shows how the energy transition is going to look like in the future. And Clean Energy Cities is a program within that focuses on cities are going to be leading the energy transition, because as we decarbonize our energy built environment, housing and transport, it'll be decentralized, the energy system, from the big centralized system of grids that we had before. into ones where it really is driven by lots of smaller local actions. And we'll talk about through what those are. And it'd be really driven by digitalization and technology and the sharing of data to manage that. So we'll get into all of that. That's basically why cities will be in the lead, kind of almost unexpectedly for them in a way. And
Sure.
we can talk around the capacity of cities to actually do something and be that and be those leaders, because that's been the topic of many different panels and different discussions I've been on with cities over the last few months.
Sure. Okay. And one term comes to mind, Stephen, now that you've touched on that, is the term smart cities. For somebody like yourself, you're going to be absolutely fluent in exactly what that means. But I know sometimes online I've noticed that there is some confusion. Can you clarify the term, please?
Smart cities is the use in data technology to improve the life of a city. I mean, that's basically what it is. Now you can split it into all different sectors. How the use kind of enhances the transport sector, the energy sector, the housing sector. But at its base, it's simply kind of the use in data technology to make living, working, and playing in a city better for everyone. That's all it is.
Perfect. Okay. Now, on the Centre for Net Zero website, it states our access to Octopus Energy's dataset gives a unique insight into human behaviours. We use these insights, field trials, experimentation, and models to design a people-centred future energy system. Now, it's a fascinating statement. Can you expand on that, please, Stephen?
Well, first on the people-centered energy system. This means that as consumers of electricity, whether we are the person who occupies a home, or whether we're the people that work in an office building, are part of a kind of larger business community, or in public buildings, the changes in the energy system are often changed by the way that we demand energy. That'll be so different than the way that we do it now. At the moment, the way that energy comes to us is largely, and I'm speaking as somebody who's sitting in Western Europe at the moment, so I'm speaking with that kind of perspective, is taken to us with gas pipelines, with gas that can be kind of turned on demand to heat our homes, from tankers into petrol stations to be able to, for our cars to just fire, to be able to be fueled at will. When we electrify those things, we will the way that we use energy will be much different than before. First of all, renewable energy is going to be the cheapest way of providing that energy to us. And we know that it's variable. And that means that we need to be able to essentially get people to use that electricity when it's available. Like get all that charging into the cars, get those homes heated up at that time when that energy is available, and really kind of ease off that demand from people, whether we use it through prices or we use it through motivation around greenhouse gases. We're agnostic about that, but that's the basic concept of our energy system is going to be really driven by renewable energy. Use it when it's there. Don't get into the situation we're in now, where we're paying people that own wind farms in Scotland to turn off the wind farms simply because they can't the electrons don't have nowhere to go during windy times. We need to be able to really use it when it's happening. And for example, electric vehicle batteries are an amazing way of doing that, as one example, because they could power a typical home for a week. On the other hand, it's like turning on 1,000 light bulbs at once. So these are the kinds of changes in the energy transition. And when we say these technical words like distributed energy assets, it simply is like we will be ourselves as homeowners or tenants, really kind of using or owning a lot of the parts of the energy system that we wouldn't before, once we have our hands on photovoltaics on buildings. Even the heat pumps that will replace boilers within homes, and of course, like the storage, to be able to kind of have that backup for times when the day is cloudy, it's cold, there's a lot of demand in the system. But that kind of consumer demand change is really led by the way that people use energy, that saves them money and saves the planet at the same time. That is the pioneering research that we want to focus on. And there's some field trials, because you said before, about the field trials that we've done before. There's one called HeatFlex, for instance, that we're doing with Nesta, where we're asking people, tell us about how tolerant you are of the temperature in your home in the evening. And we will actually in the future, the cheapest times of actually heating that home might be at 1 or 2 p.m. May not be at 5 p.m. Actually, it definitely isn't at 5 p.m. Even now. The wholesale price is like 8 times what it is during the rest of the day at 5 p.m. How do we actually automate that process of preheating the home so you still feel comfortable at 18, 19, 20 degrees? So we're not asking people to kind of cut their comfort. We're asking them to change the way that they use energy from this kind of just on demand kind of way of doing it at the moment to it's still on demand, but it's done in a different way, in an environmentally sustainable way, in a cheaper way for them. And that's something that will be driven by the electrification of our built environments and our transport networks. And that's really those are the types of things that are at the center of Center for Net Zero, to kind of use that tautology in there. And why, when I work with cities, it's how you aggregate and combine the power of all of these individual actions up together, and how cities promote this kind of consumer engagement as one of the pillars of clean energy cities, along with the changing of their urban structure and the changing of the investment climate that we focus on within clean energy cities, and kind of the recommendations that we make for cities.
Right. Okay. Now I've had the experience of getting solar, and actually, because I am, very much into nature and the environment, feeling really excited. So I hope that a lot of people, as we go through the transition, will feel a similar feeling, that excitement of knowing that you're using clean energy, and exactly what we've spoken about, Stephen, managing it. Now, what strikes me about yourself is you have a very interesting background. I'm always curious about people. I mean, all of this transition is about people, places, and the planet, obviously, and what somebody will bring to the work in this massively important time in history, and what their own background is. And in your particular case, you've studied history, which actually I also studied, philosophy, architecture, and urban studies. And some of the times that you were studying, you were over in the US. Do you feel that kind of combination of both the traveling and the blend of studies, do you feel that they bring something special to what you're doing now, Stephen?
It's special because when we work with the energy system and people, you really kind of have to have that kind of engineering and social science crossover that happens all the time. It's understanding the effect on people and those kind of qualitative kind of research topics of how people's perception, feeling, motivations are in being part of the energy system, and even all the different parts that actually kind of want to change as well. How do we know how well the engineers that are running the district networks really want to change the way they do things, rather than just keep reinforcing the grid and charging everyone for it like a big regressive taxation that's on there? How do the politicians feel about dealing with such a technical topic that they never had to interact with before? And being in different countries has kind of opened up my own perspective. And I'm speaking to somebody who has not spent time in the global south. So those who are screaming in the background, you haven't done work in the emerging markets. Yes, I've not. But between kind of the places I've lived and experienced, you kind of get this understanding of how people in different markets will react to that offer. that helps you kind of understand a little bit what happens in emerging markets as well. So, for example, in Johannesburg, one of the case studies that we built out studied how 1,000 megawatts. Don't worry about the kind of the numbers there, but it's the scale that matters. 1,000 megawatt coal power plant has been taken down, and 500 million of funding from the World Bank has been redirected towards only 250 megawatts of renewable energy and solar and wind that was in there. And the reason why that kind of scale could be done is that people in those areas are used to being flexible because their electricity has been cut off all the time.
Sure.
But how do we actually learn from those kinds of lessons where we don't have to cut people's electricity off? To actually get that kind of flexibility built into people's use of energy in the future inside of cities, and get that kind of behavior change that
Sure.
happens. And I suppose, while speaking to yourself, who's Irish, I started my career in Ireland. Spent 2 years as an urban designer in Ireland because
where were you, Stephen? Because I did have a good look at your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing that at all. Whereabouts were you?
I was. This is. I'm going to use an Americanism now. It's just this is very inside baseball. But I was above the Carphone warehouse in the middle of Grafton Street in an office there, in a company called Urban Initiatives, which is a London-based company. And
Wow.
I'd gone to architecture school in Paris and decided that I was moving back to Europe somewhere, somehow, and I needed a work permit. And where was the one place that was giving work permits to people who worked in urban planning construction? Ireland was, because there was a housing boom, the Celtic Tiger, all that kind of stuff that was happening 22 years ago.
Wow.
And I didn't know anyone there. And I arrived and was walking down Grafton Street and saw the nameplate. And I said, it says Urban Initiatives. It's the kind of thing I want to do. I want to be an urbanist. And I rang the doorbell, and they said, well, sure, come up. And they just hired 2 local associates in Dublin. And I had said, are you looking for somebody to draw the plans, answer the phone, run the computers, manage the data, anything? And they said, maybe. The managing director will be here from London next week. And yeah, hand us your CV. Do you have a letter? No. Like, do you want to write one? I just hand wrote one and gave it to them there and then. And then I met the managing director the next week, and it turned out that his father had been a professional boxer in South Africa. So this man was 6'5" and huge, and looking over a plan, and he looked behind him, talked to me for 5 minutes, said 90% sure, I think you have a job, and went back to looking at the plan again. And I worked for him. His name is Kelvin Campbell, for 8 years.
What an amazing story.
And that's it. And after a couple of years in Ireland, they moved me to the UK, and that's how I got to London, through that route of Ireland and a gigantic man from South Africa.
It's an amazing story. And you know what? I'd love to start to talk to you about your time in Dublin, but unfortunately, I don't think that's what the listeners want to hear. But when I touched on your personal experience, Stephen, you also talked about politicians and their reactions and the people themselves. And I think that you are also extremely well positioned to understand all that, particularly given that you did deliver the Mayor of London's programme going back a certain amount of years ago, direct investment for smart city technologies across public and private sector in London.
I was the smart cities lead for the Greater London Authority, which is the that governs the city region of London and the 33 boroughs that are out there, and for both Boris Johnson and Sadiq Khan during that time. So I wrote one for Boris Johnson, wrote another for Sadiq Khan. I do remember. I I wrote the foreword for the plan for Boris Johnson, and this is kind of my first interaction with politicians. And I got it back from his private office saying, "Thank you for drafting the foreword, but Boris Johnson does not speak like this." And so
Okay.
and so I had to go back and kind of read more about some speeches he'd done or books he's written and try again. But that was kind of a first kind of lesson in, like, you are an official, but you really need to understand the language and perspective of politicians and how they view things, and the way, one of the things that kind of I did towards the end was establish commission the business case for the London Office of Technology and Innovation, because we found that too often the mayor of London would be seen as the person that would kind of own innovation in smart city technology or digital public services, but the people delivering that and kind of spending the 40 million on the ground were the 33 boroughs that actually were working with citizens, and they wanted to have more ownership of that process of innovation. And so I was working for kind of the new chief digital officer. His name is Theo Blackwell, who's still there now, for the Greater London Authority. And we set up a membership organization that all the different boroughs with London could sign up to share expertise in how to actually commission these technologies without together, and actually have one voice to the market for platforms for their residents to interact with the housing system, with other kind of services that they put forward, and also for kind of the commissioning of sensor technologies, the commissioning of other digital public services that they wanted to put forward. And we got 14 of the 33 boroughs to be signed up after lots of communication across all three political parties, which are the Labour, Conservative, and Liberal Democrat parties, and formed a £2.5 million organization out of scratch, by really communicating with the politicians that we want you to be the owners of this process of innovation in smart city technologies, of digital public services. And it's something I take back to my work now in clean energy cities, to be able to say, like, we have recommendations for you as cities, but we realize that there's some with the powers that you have now that you could do in the next couple of years. And we call those the 2025 recommendations that we have, of what you can do with for land development, for the investment with the money that you have, for the voice that you have with consumers. But also in the next 15 years, you're going to have to try to use the powers of national governments, of taxation, use the powers of the finance sector, for example, kind of harnessing pension funds and their kind of patient capital into low carbon technologies and renewable technologies through cities, and also try to harness the real estate market to really kind of put the types of land uses into cities which are complementary to each other, make a more resilient energy system that is cheaper and fair for everyone. But we knew when we went in creating clean energy cities that there were these two speeds that politicians wanted to focus on. Definitely is what they want to do now, but there is an election coming. We're always aware of that, to show those kind of results in the next year or two, but also ones that are able to put together that long-term vision, saying, of the next 10 to 15 years, what kind of city do we want to have? Because they're also selling that future when they're trying to get support from their residents and from their businesses in their programs or being elected the next time. And also it kind of helps them motivate the officials, and I was an official as well, that are there for the long term. They will be seeding programs through that last beyond one political cycle. And of course, I was interacting a lot with the planning system, where that is exactly what a lot of them were needed to focus on, because the built environment delivers slowly. and especially in a place like the UK, where
Mm-hmm.
where we have the oldest building stock in Europe, according to the Building Research Establishment, or the BRE that they're called now, in a report they put out a couple of years ago, and they actually have the slowest replacement rates of buildings of any country in Europe as well. So this and on top of that, they have the least energy efficient buildings because of these two reasons, which kind of goes to show. So the challenges are great here. And
Of course.
if you overcome them here, you actually it's almost easier to take models that you built out in the UK and put them into other countries. And this actually has been proven by the fact that this is a huge center in London here for engineering consultancy, real estate investment that kind of has companies here. I can name them over and over again, from Grimshaw to Savills to CBRE to Bureau Happold, et cetera, that kind of have that are centered here and really roll out across Europe, because the most difficult problems often are here in the UK. But that's something that's kind of interesting for those who been here like I have for the last 20 years.
Sure. But no, it's in itself, it's very true, and it's a fascinating concept. The most difficult problems can, often with the right people involved, bring some of the most imaginative and solid solutions.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic. Now, obviously, we're not just concentrating on the UK, because you and lots of other people have been involved in Clean Energy Cities, which is a research project working with mayors from all over the world, from the likes of Amsterdam to Paris, but obviously going into the States and many different places. And you've been getting real world data from all of these different places, which has been used to explore factors that are important to the local energy transitions. So, which might be obviously including the likes of low carbon technologies, electricity systems, consumer flexibility, and so on. Do you want to talk in a bit more detail, Stephen, about this globally?
Clean Energy Cities is a framework of recommendations that we gave to 5 different typologies of cities globally across the world. And we took data from 17 cities to form these, from the open data about the structure of the city, the number of people, the kind of commercial floor space, the number of households, the density, the open space available within the city, but also from their energy system, how much was decarbonized of their electricity network so far, how much further do they have to go, how much of their heat and transport and cooling, because you remember, like a lot of you're sitting here in Western Europe, and yourself are and we don't think a lot about cooling, but actually is a huge and growing energy consumption over in many places around the world. How much of that is powered by electricity? How much of it is powered by gas right now? And we started looking as well as the kind of the ability of consumers to interact with those with new lower carbon technologies. A lot of them will be digitalized. A lot of them you'll have a lot of dependence on automation from smart thermostats or EV charging to be able to have a fair and affordable energy system in the future. Are people used to using digital services? Are they really motivated by the climate transition? Is the startup community something that actually is really strong in that area to be able to deliver? So we took all these factors of the scale of the problem, of the size of the city, the decarbonization of the electricity system, where they have to go, looking at it, and the urban structure of the place, how mixed is the city, how much open space is there for installing more renewable technologies, for example, in the city, and of course, like the consumer side of things as well. How engaged are those consumers going to be? And I mean consumers who are both residents and who are and from businesses as well. And we took this data and found that there were kind of 5 general types of cities around the world. We call them the connected city, the free market city, the scalable city, the distributed city, and the available city. and they range from kind of big global north cities, such as London or Paris or Tokyo, that we took data from, which have huge populations and have a lot of people who are very used to using, very savvy with digital services. But there's a large kind of digital divide that's very apparent in those places as well. Through to, for example, kind of what we call a distributed city, which is a place like Amsterdam or Medellin, that in Colombia, so that kind of crosses both the global north and the global south. And there's a high proportion of renewable energy that's locally generated nearby compared to demand that's there. But also there's a higher take up of electric vehicles, and kind of the transport system is a bit more kind of decarbonized than in other places. And then you have places in the global south that we call scalable cities, where the consumption in the future is going to be much higher than it is now. In a place like Johannesburg that I mentioned,
Sure.
For example, but there are also typically places where renewable energy can be scaled at a huge level. At that, because of the weather in these places is really advantageous, in a way that may not be in a place which is a little more cloudy, such as London. But don't worry, we're windy enough over here as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we built out these recommendations for if you wanted to have a stable electricity grid with decarbonized heat, cooling, and transport systems in cities where it's powered by renewable energy and is low cost and not just driven by huge engineering investment into the electricity network, which turns into just a big regressive taxation for everyone. That everyone has to pay for. And we had these recommendations that range from, so for example, from a place like London, Tokyo, or Paris, a connected city, you might actually be really dependent on batteries, electric vehicles in the most connected places. You might have to reserve a lot of space for them to be an energy resource in places where you may not have as much room for renewable energy on rooftops or in public spaces, because those spaces aren't really there. And at the same time, if you're actually commissioning those, you're actually talking about small and many rather than kind of bigger and fewer that are out there. And of course, like, you may also kind of on the consumer engagement side be thinking about what kind of information that we actually need to get to our citizens, but also how do we actually harness in the future the taxation system to de-risk that investment by individual homeowners, because they typically will, if you're a building owner, you don't have the building for 30 years, you have it for 5 years. How do you de-risk it enough so you're willing to make that investment, and it's something that a liability you can sell on to the next person, which is acceptable to them. Those are the kinds of questions that come out all the time if you're speaking to those who are dealing with the venture capital community, those who are doing investments in the real estate industry in the built environment. Those are concerns that come up all the time. And there's a kind of a potted history of programs. The one in the UK that we call the green, the new Green Deal, which failed because they were trying to build that kind of ability for people to invest into heat pumps or other kind of new energy, new ways of heating their home that they can sell on to the next person, and it just didn't work out. We know, kind of big headline for kind of, let's take Germany, for example. Let's open up beyond the UK. There was a report that was done by the German government that found that by 2045, about 6 billion euros would have to be invested by the entire country, both public, private, both those sectors, to achieve net zero by 2045. About 6 billion be invested. How much would the country save? 6 billion by 2045 by doing that. Now, the people that are doing the spending and the people who are doing the saving, how do you make sure that those are the same people? You can't guarantee it. So there is always kind of that question all the time. Are the people who have control of that property in a city making that investment, are they able to recoup that investment? Are those benefits of lower energy costs or better services just going towards the tenants and not able to go back to the owners that made that investment? Those are all questions that come out in the really big picture of investment in cities, and that and a lot of those questions are very central to how politicians, how property owners, how people who are using energy are viewing the energy system, and bring that all together really happens within cities.
Yes, it's super complex, obviously, Stephen.
Yeah.
So going back to the 5 different city types, would you like to highlight each type, explaining, succinctly what it's all about, and give us an example of one city that pertains to that type?
Sure, I'd be very willing to do that. So, I think I said before, the connected city that we have is kind of example of a big global north city that you typically find in London, Paris, Tokyo are examples of that, and they are places which have huge challenge and very complex deal with it. So often the effect sizes, if we can use that scientific term, of taking an action within those cities is really hard to discern. And so you have to deal with that with the scale of the problem that's there. You also find that there's a huge amount of commercial floor space. So the challenge, it really kind of centers a lot on the commercial real estate market to be able to deliver decarbonization of those in those cities. So there's that relationship is really important as well. It's by far one of the biggest factors that's in there. But we also know that investment is there and waiting to be used. So the financing of low carbon technology, of installing heat pumps, of installing photovoltaics onto commercial rooftop spaces, of putting in storage inside those areas. That financing is kind of sitting there and waiting to be used if the right kind of case is made. Case is often made by new ventures that are in the built environment that can be done. I was just being told today about a new venture called Bankers Without Borders, which essentially is a kind of neighborhood sustainable investment model as a service to be able to get those kinds of assets within neighborhoods, and those are really kind of typically found within connected cities, and of course, one example that we have here is in London to do that. So those are the factors that make it different from other types of places. The second one is a free market city. So this is a place where the governments there are kind of not as interventionist and will be more dependent on the private sector to be leaders in it. So they will really center on market reform, on consumers having the choice in things like dynamic tariffs. One example is in Singapore, where they kind of require all the different energy companies to have a dynamic tariff, which means that it reflects the wholesale rates of energy. The wholesale rates of energy typically in a Western country or a place like Singapore will be between 4 and 8 times in the evening than it is at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, or even around noon. And the reason for that is when demand far exceeds the ability of renewable energy to generate. Because renewable energy is the cheapest way of making electricity. And so they're dependent on those kinds of prices to encourage use at the times when it's cheaper, and using a bit less, or kind of shifting it away from the times where it's more expensive. They're also typified by being very mixed in their land uses. And this is advantageous to building a clean energy city, because the urban planner in me says there's something in the resilience of having commercial buildings and residential buildings that are near each other, because commercial buildings will typically use more energy during the daytime. Residential buildings will typically use them in first thing in the morning, or later in the afternoon and into the evening. And when you're putting in local generation and storage into that area to actually get generation very close to where it's being used, that kind of mix makes it much more of a viable proposition to make to the building owners, to the market and cities in general. So that's why we see it as a free market city, because of those factors of kind of the market kind of leading for both the consumer engagement side and the real estate sector. As well. And so the scalable city example is Buenos Aires or Nairobi, are places where there's a lot of potential for renewable energy to replace coal-fired power stations, more traditional ways of using energy, because there's a lot of loans available from the World Bank. There's a lot of incentives for them to change to make that transition. But at the same time, demand is going to be increasing really rapidly for especially for cooling, but also for heating in those places as well. So that's some kind of opportunity. And I gave the example before about the change in Johannesburg that got made very, very recently. The distributed city is one which is typified by Stockholm as an example of it, for example, where there's a high degree of regional renewables, where there's a lot of hydro, for instance, biogas inside that city already in proportion to its demand, and have a lot of EV ownership that's there as well. And then finally, the available city is a place where there's a lot of land kind of in and around the city is available for experimentation, renewable energy generation, and there's a lot of available data, because these are typically places like Valencia or Manchester or Nantes in Western Europe, where, as I said before, with a connected city, you often can't see the effect of the action you take. In an available city, you can. There are often places where the European Commission or other kind of funding bodies have been putting innovation money into these cities, and that's because you can see that effect size of making that action. And so I worked on a couple of smart cities projects that are funded by Horizon 2020, which is a European commercial research and development projects. And even though I was working for London, I could see, for example, with Bristol and the Replicate project, or Uppsala in Sweden with the positive energy districts project. You could really start to see the effect on the local energy network in a place in these kinds of places, which was really amazing to see. So you can often kind of see the technologies being proven at a district or city scale in those places first before they start transferring to others, which is really interesting type of city.
That's a brilliant explanation of all five types and great examples. On top of that, Stephen, we also have two UK-based proof of concept projects, which are also really, really interesting as examples. Oxford, first of all, which is a distributed city. Can you tell us a bit about that?
We're being funded by Innovate UK, which is part of the UK's Research and Innovation Agency, which looks at what are the right kind of business models for the future that we can that will fuel the economy, and we have a grant from the Urban Living Project from Innovate UK to focus on how do we actually manage the data of the energy transition at a city scale? Because in Oxford, they'll be going from 800 retrofits, or rather kind of installations of insulation, PV on roofs, heat pumps inside of buildings, batteries and storage inside of buildings, all those actions being made. 800 a year, in a decade to 800 a day. And the speed at which these assets, as we call them, in the energy system are going to be put in really requires knowledge to be shared really rapidly with the electricity network, because they can be a big blocker in putting these into homes. They can start to say no, for instance. There's been an example that I can think of recently. I think it was in Leicester in England, which is a similar type of city, that 2 streets of heat pumps for a social housing provider didn't get installed because the electricity network said that there was no capacity to put them in. And that was just a heat pump. It wasn't even putting in renewable energy or putting in photovoltaics in there. And really proving that the kind of behavior change that we need from people that use our buildings to, for example, like we said before, in an example, maybe heating the home earlier when there's more renewable energy and less pressure on the grid, for instance, and doing a bit less in the evening where there's a lot more pressure on the system. That will actually give the networks enough confidence to say, let it rip, let it be installed, and instead of try to put the brakes on it and say, wait for us to have a huge engineering project to upgrade the network. That's one example that we have for kind of that kind of sharing of data of what's going in, what is the wattage that's going into all the different homes, for instance, based on the manufacturing kind of metadata that we have, for example. Those are the types of things that we're working on with Oxford, and with Birmingham, we're focusing on how the different sectors of the built environment, and we call them technically in the energy world. I learned this when I did a PhD in energy and buildings, coming out of urban design and doing a PhD in energy buildings. The residential sector is called the domestic sector, and everything else is called the non-domestic sector.
Okay.
And how do these sectors of the built environment support each other in the energy transition? One thing that we know is that people use energy differently, that their behavior in the future of how they use all these different assets that I described before is going to depend on their lifestyle, of their understanding of the technologies, of their own flexibility of their in their own lives, whether they're kind of families where there's not much choice of what times you do things, or people like myself who don't have one. I have a lot of choice. What's the difference between what the optimized vision that we have in the future of people perfectly using the generation on their homes and kind of the storage that they have available to have like a perfectly even like demand of electricity through the day that doesn't have these kinds of peaks. We know that doesn't exist. But when that happens, what are the opportunities for the non-domestic sector that is sitting next door to make up those differences between our optimized, idealized performance of those buildings and the actual performance? We talk all the time between kind of modeled and actual performance of buildings in the built those in the construction sector, they know this extremely well. And what are the opportunities for investments into storage, investment into their own renewable energy resources that could make money by selling to the grid at times when it's very expensive, because that's when people in the residential sector want to be using them, potentially lowering the prices for everyone in the local area by doing that. So these are the things that we're working with the Alan Turing Institute, which is a consortium of 5 different leading research universities. I think it's expanded to about 8-10 now, between UCL, Imperial, Birmingham, the University of Birmingham, which is there on the ground there, Oxford and Cambridge together, that focus on the use of artificial intelligence and digital technologies to drive change in our society, in our places. So I'm very kind of happy to be working with them. So those are a couple of proof of concepts that we've gotten started in the last couple of months, and it's really fast for us to almost go from late November releasing Clean Energy Cities as a framework or a way of thinking about how cities lead the energy transition into real projects working on the ground. And so we've been very lucky to really start to put it into practice with our data analysts and data scientists, with some of the best minds around the world, and from the University of Birmingham, from Oxford University and Oxford Brookes University over on the Oxford side, and of course with the city councils who are really motivated to deliver on their side.
We've said on so many episodes, Stephen, in various situations, very varied situations, the collaboration, of course, is key to all of this. And you know what? We're living in fascinating times, very challenging, but at the same time, kind of fascinating. I noticed on LinkedIn that there's a peer learning cohort that they're looking for participants to take part, obviously, in clean energy in cities, at EV again, and also incorporating community voices, which I think would be super important as well. Do you know much about this?
I know a lot about the peer learning side of things, actually, from the work I've been doing with the European Commission. And so I've been an assessor of funding applications for carbon neutral buildings and for circular materials within buildings for the European Urban Initiative. Which is the successor to the Urban Innovative Actions Program, which was funded in the last kind of 7-year funding round of the European Union, and this has been really kind of is an award of about 50 million that'll be made in the next couple of weeks. I think that will be announced to be made. I think we had our final meeting about 3 days ago in the middle of April, 2023. Of those who might be listening in the next year or so, that's when we're talking right now. And what the next few months are going to be doing, and I'm going to be sticking around as an advisor to the Commission with this program, is to build up peer review for where cities go and start to learn, kind of go and teach with each other. And there's a methodology that's been developed by the Commission over the past few years of how to bring cities together to review each other's projects and have that learning of like carbon neutral buildings, of renewable energy projects. And so I'm looking forward to that over the last few years. If people want to look up some examples of how that was done in the last big European Union funding round, look up the URBACT program. URB, the first 3 letters of urban, and ACT. Put together is URBACT. That if you look up that program, you'll see some examples of that in the last funding round. So it's a pleasure to kind of work with cities and how they've been doing this in the past. And when I worked on the Sharing Cities project, which is the Horizon 2020 project that London did with Lisbon and Milan. That was kind of quite central in the group of cities that we worked with, of how, for example, in street lighting or in smart heating solutions, the testing of apps, the testing of kind of a market in behavior change that we built up, that was done in London and Milan and Lisbon respectively, how that kind of learning from each other would happen, so we can go and replicate into each other's cities. Like that's what a lot of funding internationally is focused on. If you're thinking about that with the European Commission or ASEAN Smart Cities, which is one of the case studies that I've built up with Singapore and Jakarta, when I interviewed some of the officials from there over the last month or so, with a project that was funded by the Connected Places Catapult. Those are all good examples of how cities are really learning from each other, because they don't have the capacity to kind of to do these projects kind of starting from the beginning. And oftentimes, and this is one of the reasons that we created the London Office of Technology Innovation in the first place, you get this kind of supplier capture, where you're so dependent on the consultancies or the private sector market to sell you a solution that they've also sold to somebody else and somebody else, where that almost kind of you're overpaying because you're starting again from the beginning, when you don't have that capacity and knowledge. And building up those networks and enable cities to build that capacity and build that knowledge, so they can be better procurers and be better buyers of sustainable technologies. And cities really kind of can come to the fore of that. And of course, I can wave around my Italian passport to the European Commission and pretend like I'm not British and not American, which is quite kind of fun, fun to do as well.
Oh dear. Okay, so heading back to the UK, Stephen,
Yeah.
you wrote an article in March of 2023 that stated that the budget announcement could spell good news for local authorities and the energy transition. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
So what has happened in the UK is it's one of the most centralized countries in the world, where devolution has been slow, of mayors having power of their own budgets for spending on their own cities, and you're often dependent on national government to make decisions to do so. So, for example, London has a combined budget between the 33 boroughs and the Mayor of London of about £48 billion. New York City, similar number of people, they have a budget which is over $100 billion. So the scale of the ability of New York and their system, which is much more devolved to spend on change of their cities with using and making their own decisions, is much higher than a place like London. What the decision was made by the national government is to have two test areas, which were Manchester and Birmingham, where they're going to start with another billion per year to be given to them. And actually, a lot of the powers are going to be around retrofits coming in 2025. A lot of the funding that is usually would come with, in the UK, it's called the Homes and Communities Agency. That would be done for kind of retrofits of affordable housing, of the building portfolio and street lighting portfolio that cities will have. So that kind of change is going to be really welcome, where the local mayors, which are named Andy Burnham for Greater Manchester, and Andy Street, which is for the West Midlands, which includes Birmingham, are going to have that power to make the decision what works best for them. And we created Clean Energy Cities because we know that those types of cities will have a different solution. But of course, we want them to learn from each other as well. We just talked about peer review. We actually kind of need to have cities that have, are included in a typology and know which other cities are similar enough to them that they can learn from each other. But all cities will be unique and have their own solution. So that's why I wrote that article. Finally, one of the pieces of evidence that drove that analysis was something that was done by the Prospering for the Energy Revolution program within UKI, which focused on the local energy transition, which just finished about a couple months ago. And I was on a panel in Manchester discussing this. And the opening of that panel was done by PwC, who produced a report for them that said that if you were going to have a place-based energy transition, you can go from investing 200 million over the next decade on the energy transition to get 100 million benefit from it, to only spending 50 million and getting 100 million benefit as well. And so this is the kind of change that having a the focus on what is right for this kind of place, instead of having something which is funded as a top-down, centralized energy transition, to something which is locally based. And that's something which is a really powerful piece of evidence that was put together. That was something we all kind of knew intuitive already, but for economists to actually come out and say, you're actually kind of making money by having a place-based energy transition for UK PLC, to use that word instead of spending it, is really powerful.
It's hugely important, obviously. Now, another event, going back to dates, which was yesterday, because we're recording on the 20th of April 2023. Yesterday you were speaking at the city's Climate Action Summit in London.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, you've just obviously fresh out of that. What were your key takeaways? How did it all go?
My key takeaways is that there's a lot of worry by cities. I was on a panel with Barnsley, and Bristol and Corby, which are in 3 different areas of England. And there was a lot of focus on relationships with the energy networks and connections of renewable energy, and kind of, for example, solar, or the small amount of onshore winds, which is given permission in England right now, and the weight of a decade, maybe more, into putting more local generation into the energy system. And one of the takeaways was one of the things that we kind of said in Clean Energy Cities all along, that we're probably talking about more and fewer types of assets that go into the system. Rooftop solar instead of solar farms, of batteries and heat pumps for individual buildings instead of big arrays of heat pumps and district networks. And that's something which kind of came clear from that as well. That local generation and storage we've been promoting within Clean Energy Cities is something which they're now realizing that they have to do that investment across many different buildings at scale, rather than try to get that scale from individual projects, which are understandably easier to manage than trying to deal with the building stock in front of them. But I think the penny's dropping. That is the way that they're going to have to manage local generation and storage going forward.
Okay. Now, one topic that's been sort of front and centre a lot recently in Constructive Voices is biodiversity. And whilst I appreciate it's not necessarily your main topic, how do you see, Stephen, that fits within the vision and scope of the Centre for Net Zero?
It's a signal that if a place is biodiverse, I mean, you bring me back my urban design days. Here we go. And it's a signal that a place is joined up and connected with each other if you have biodiversity, because typically what you have in cities that are biodiverse is green corridors of opportunities for plants or wildlife to be able to kind of make its way in and out to the city, kind of using everything from the back gardens to parklands to other kind of assets through the city. And it's quite interesting here in London that we have the National Park City concept, where I actually used to sit next to the founder of that in a co-working space a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually started to count up kind of what are all the different green spaces in a city, and found that in a place like London, you're talking about 20-25% of the land area of the city is, if you count all the back gardens, parklands, etc., is that's there. Now, on the other side of things, you can say there's so much road space, so you have an equal amount of road space in a city, which is blocking biodiversity from happening as well. So, and once you have the electrification of transport, for example, you'll start to get a better quality of life in those green spaces, more ability for kind of wildlife or plants to be able to thrive in ways that they couldn't when you have petrol cars that are around, and it'll start to encourage more investment into biodiversity as well. And this, I'm kind of borrowing some of the words from Greg Clark, who's the chair of the Connected Places Catapult, who said that you'll start to actually see those co-benefits from making the energy transition. And the example he was giving with was with electrification of transport. But you could make the same argument with the electrification of buildings as well, where you don't have gas boilers that are sitting and kind of putting exhaust right next to a building as well. That starts to give the opportunity for green spaces to thrive more easily, and then people will start using them more as well, and those benefits will come for economic development on top of the biodiversity that you get in the city. And then you start to get cross financing, where the people who want to see more biodiversity, or they want to see just a better quality of life in the city, start to fund the energy transition because they see the benefits coming to them. So there is a connectedness between all these different parts of a city, where the energy transition is not just seen as its own little sector to one side. It's actually kind of one part where all the different sectors are connected to each other and cross finance each other. That's something where in the work that we do, we kind of definitely can see that.
Definitely. One comment that came up in a chat recently with one of our, let's say, contributors, a lady called Claire Wansbury from Atkins Global, was the concept of, we don't need to defend and control nature. In fact, we would ideally want to be embracing it and harnessing it.
Agreed. Well, I mean, again, you bring back to my old urban design days. That there's a concept called the urban heat island that I'm sure that she went over in extensive detail, and you reduce the need to cool buildings by having this kind of biodiversity through your streets and spaces.
Yeah, of course.
There's an amazing video from the 1970s from Stuttgart. They were the first people to ever hire a climate scientist in there as a city official, and they actually were trying to find out how they can build green corridors to bring kind of cooler winds cool down the city, because it's a city in a bowl, kind of like you hear about Los Angeles and to an extent London, that was overheating over time. They've started to extend it to painting roofs white, to having car parks which have soil as the base instead of asphalt. All these different parts of using nature-based solutions to cities really start to reduce the need for energy consumption, which makes the energy transition easier to accomplish. So, and that's something which is really welcome.
This is Constructive Voices.
So, Pete, another great guest, Stephen Lorimer, talking about clean energy cities. And that thing about the 5 different typologies, the connected, free market, scalable, distributed and available cities, really interesting to sort of get a perspective on where different cities around the world fit into that. Some are more developed in some areas, but lagging in others, and vice versa. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a huge amount of research has gone into this, and a huge amount of perspective in how cities live, the environments that they are in terms of climate, in terms of location, in terms of so many different aspects that I suppose until you actually hear Stephen say it all makes sense. But I suppose you can look past an awful lot of this information and sort of generalize an awful lot. And I think this was an eye opener for me to perspective on the way people live and the way a city functions as well, and how that function can be adapted to become more sustainable and to get to what he terms as a clean energy city. So really, really interesting stuff, and what a super listen that was. Another thing I loved about it was every aspect, every corner of the globe was discussed, and I really liked the way that he got into how that information is collated, because I suppose we all think about. I suppose when you hear a conversation happening, you start making assumptions, or you start making up your own mind on certain aspects of how people live, and then when you hear a conversation like what Stephen and Jackie just had, you can clearly see that there's so many perspectives and there's so many different ingredients that go into the melting pot to produce how a city functions and why it probably functions that way. And then the good thing obviously is how can that information be utilised to improve how the city performs in terms of its renewable energy and its energy efficiency going forward.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and obviously a big topic for the construction industry and wider society. And what strikes me when I hear conversations like this is that we ask a hell of a lot of our cities. You know, we put a lot of demands on them. We want it to be a place where lots of people can live, where they can get about easily, where there are things for them to do, where the business structure is in such a way that the economy will be great. But now we also want it to be done cleaner and more efficiently. And that's a big ask. And some of those cities that are hailed, and a lot of cities make this claim to be the greatest city in the world. But of course, some of those older cities are the ones that are perhaps facing the biggest battles to modernize and to face up to the challenges ahead.
Totally agree. You know, there's an old saying that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle between two people's perspectives. And you know, I think the same can be said here. That, like, what I really enjoyed about this interview was that, you know, every different detail was looked at. Look, I'm sure there was probably one or two small elements out there that weren't discussed, but, you know, they really have tried to look at how city functions and how it operates from every perspective. That's, for me, is something that's so important. You know, I think you cannot generalize when it comes to how people live and how anything functions, whether it's a machine, whether it's a human, or whether it's a city. You know, you've got to look at the different aspects, and you've got to look at the different on the ground realities that are happening in each area. And then when you've done that, you can actually make a decision based on fact and based on, you know, real life actions. And again, I really do like when people take their time and look at other people's perspectives and listen to other people's perspectives and don't go into the situation in a single-minded way. The other thing we took out of this, which was great there at the end, the peer learning cohort, like, so that information is then being further discussed with other people who are doing something similar, and the information is being shared. And again, you know, when we share this type of information, and when we share learning and we share understanding of what is working and what is not working in any subject, it's going to work. And as we are very aware and we really do champion this subject on Constructive Voices. This is obviously such a big subject within our industry and a big subject within our lives in general. It's really good to hear that we have some very solid people, you know, looking at stuff in the right way. I found it a very positive interview, if I'm honest, and I found that I got a lot of hope from it as well. So please God, we can start seeing some of these results going in the right direction, and please God, future governments and future powers that be can start to see these entities and see these figures that are being produced as being achievable, and they can actually adapt themselves and adapt their cities and adapt the way that we live for the better, and do it in a manageable way. So, you know, we're not trying to generalize, we're not trying to come up with a one fix all solution. We're looking at something in the right way, and we're growing and working in the right direction. And again, as I said there, a lot of positivity came out of this one for me, Steve.
Yeah, well, I mean, what a great way to end this episode, with a passionate call to action from you there for people to do what's needed to be done to ensure that our cities remain the heartbeat of our countries and our economies and our lives. As always, the conversation is building. We'll be talking more in future episodes about this topic. There'll be a lot more to come and a lot more perspectives. Pete, as always, great to talk to you.
Cheers, mate. Thank you very much. I'm off now to have a slice of birthday cake for myself, and I look forward to talking to you soon, my man.
Yeah, let's give the final word then, as you've mentioned the birthday again, to a character who, for copyright reasons, we're only allowed to refer to as Frog Puppet.
Happy birthday!
Oh, you're a man of many talents, Steve. Thanks very much. Chat soon.
And that's all for this episode of Constructive Voices. Please take a moment to share it with others who may find it interesting. Follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes automatically on your favourite podcast app, and rate and review the podcast if you can. You can also listen to the latest episode by saying, Alexa, play Constructive Voices podcast.
Here's Constructive Voices. Here's the latest episode.
And on our website, where there's lots more information too. That's constructive-voices.com. Don't forget the dash. Until next time, thanks for listening. You're really helping us build something.